Hello, everyone. This is part 1 of week 1 of Plato, a class on the Protagoras, Phaedo, and Sophist. And today I just want to take sort of the first steps into thinking our way into the Protagoras. The Protagoras is an early dialogue. It is a somewhat atypical early dialogue because it is quite long and complex. Socrates is for the most part talking about Protagoras, but at the beginning he's talking to a young person who is a student and who is really excited that Protagoras is in town and wants to study with him. And Socrates is kind of questioning him, like, what do you want to learn from Protagoras? What is it that you hope for if you become Protagoras, a student? And that prompts a discussion about an ambition that the Sophists advertise. And Protagoras is very famous, maybe the most famous Sophist, namely that they teach virtue. And Socrates is not sure that that is even possible, whether virtue is teachable. So that is the biggest question in the Protagoras, and the different parts of the conversation approach that question from various angles. At the beginning of the text, so that is where we are now, just to sort of begin to think about these things, Socrates distinguishes between two kinds of things that one may want to learn from a teacher. One kind of thing is like the things that one studies in school. You study, let's say, geometry or a foreign language or arithmetic or music. And when you study these fields in school, it's not necessarily because you are hoping to become a mathematician or a musician. Of course, someone may want to do that and pursue the things that they study in school further. But otherwise, that just counts as an education. And it counts as that today, and it counted as that also in Athens, and the Greek is Paideia. So some of the things that a young student may want to learn kind of fall into that category of just being part of an education. Other things, however, where one may go to a teacher and hope to study with them, are what Plato calls kinds of expertise, in Greek, Technê, the plural is Technê. Now, that is a really contested notion, and you will find a number of different translations in different editions of Plato and also in the secondary literature. Some people kind of stick to a slightly old-fashioned translation, art, that is outdated, but it also has its benefits because it conveys this idea that someone who masters techne is somehow an artisan or somehow, well, a master in that field. Another translation is skill. Another translation is expertise. Now, the notion of a techne is quite important to Plato's epistemology, and it's going to be a theme for us throughout the semester to think about what expertise is and what skill is and what techne is. Now, here at the beginning of the Protagoras, the question is, if someone wants to become a good person, if someone wants to, become virtuous and maybe find the teacher for that, then is that going to be a matter of either becoming an expert in something, or is that just going to be more like studying mathematics or music or a foreign language at school, or maybe neither? And Socrates comes across as quite skeptical of the idea that virtue is teachable. But here is Protagoras, and he's one of those people who advertise their ability to teach virtue. Now, one reason why one might think that the very presence of people like Protagoras kind of pushes a little bit in the direction that virtue might be a kind of expertise is that Protagoras uses this idea of teaching virtue almost synonymously with the idea of teaching what he calls political expertise, the techne of politics. Now, why might someone think that virtue and the expertise or skill or techne of politics kind of come to the same? If you consider that the type of student we are looking at here, the sort of young person that Socrates talks to, for the most part, is, someone from an aristocratic Athenian family, then you might think maybe that does make sense, because for such a student to become a good person is also to become an active Athenian, someone who is actively engaged in Athenian politics and who has the skills to do that. So from that point of view, it's not entirely implausible to think that to become a good person or a virtuous person or an excellent person is to acquire an expertise, and in particular one that one needs as a citizen. Now, here are, however, two dimensions of how Plato seems to think of Technê in early dialogues and maybe throughout the corpus, which may push against the idea that virtue is teachable in the sense in which an expertise is teachable or a Technê is teachable. And those are much debated issues, and I'm going to introduce a few things from the secondary literature, to some extent just to gesture at there being a huge discussion about the very notion of Technê. One idea is that when one learns a Technê, one acquires a specialization. So, for example, if you study medicine, you become a doctor, that is a specialization, or maybe even more narrowly, you become a cardiologist and that you're specialized now for that particular field. Or you become an architect and now you are a specialist for, building houses and so on and so forth. Now, it may seem that to become virtuous simply is not a specialization. And that is a question that interests Plato very much because ultimately, and that is something that we will also discuss at the end of the semester when we read the Sophist, it may seem like some of the most intriguing fields of human study also are not specializations. And philosophy is one of them. Philosophy, just as virtue, may seem to be in one way or another kind of about everything. And Plato is quite interested in whether that is a problem, whether you can be kind of good at something without it being something in a quite specified way. The other dimension of Technê that I want to briefly mention has been emphasized by Emily Hume-Cozy in a recent paper from 2018, and all the bibliographical data that I mentioned here are on our syllabus. She emphasizes that a Technê really is a profession. So someone goes and trains with a doctor and they become a doctor. That means they devote their life to something. It is a pursuit. It is a choice of a life. And you might think that, again, that is a kind of interesting idea with respect to virtue. On the one hand, it is not plausible to think that wanting to become a good person is like pursuing a job or profession. That is not how we think about becoming virtuous or becoming a good person. And at the same time, you might think there is something intriguing to the idea. Maybe it is somehow the most fundamental job for all of us to become a good person. So you can see that if you put it this way, it could be something that Plato, in fact, does find interesting. So I want to leave you with these two ideas for today, just to think about what is a Technê, and does it involve specialization? Does it involve that it is a profession? And how does that bear on the question of whether virtue is teachable?